to implement such and such a policy. This should have been done in consultation with the fund. I believe that is being done. But the fund is saying, be careful. That's the answer to your question, because you have balanced a lot of factors, in making sure that you will achieve a certain goal and you'll be in a position to turn around the economy and pay us our loan, World Bank loans and others, which is supporting the reform. So it appears that the fund, even if the consultation was taking place, they may not have expected him to get to this point. So that's before even the cabinet met. That's why they issued the statement that urged, or interview that urged the government to stick to the agreement that they have had with them.
Does that agreement usually include specific things to do? For example, the argument now is on VAT on electricity and then the emissions tax. Are those specifics that the agreement will cover? Some are specific. If you take the budget, I don't have my document here, but if you take the budget, they are specific. They are specific. They are stated. And that's why for some of them we even went to Parliament. Those that need a new, because it's only Parliament that can impose taxes under the Constitution. So some were passed as law. So when we're passing these things as part of the budget, yes, it's there. And we all, in fact, we pass some of them as prior action, even before they go to the board. You remember the prior actions and the rest. So apart from that, it appears that the government's agreement is based on using more taxes to do the correction, rather than tackling expenditure. As some of us have been discussing and pointing out that you need more comprehensive measures. So the answer is yes. We have them. And in fact, if you go to the IMF review, report, which went to the board before the approval, and which is now combined with Article 4, at page 11, you see the measures have been listed. The IMF have listed them in going to the board, what the government promised to do. And in fact, the expected revenue that will come to help reduce the deficit. So let me cite a few examples. Let me point the headings. The direct tax measures, which the government, overall, the government promised that when they implement these measures, they would result in a certain, amount, adding to revenue, which would then, and then with the expenditure measures, reduce the deficit. So for the direct taxes, it says revision and expansion of taxes on gambling revenue. So remember there was a gambling act, expansion of entities subject to communication service tax, increase of stamp duty, introduction of a simplified mechanism for the modified taxation, what we call the presumptive taxes for small businesses. For the indirect taxes, removal of selected VAT exemptions, alignment of the exemption and relief of the provision of the VAT Act with the customs tariff, and introduction of a 5% VAT rate on rental or commercial premises. You remember this was one of the 17 taxes that were removed back in 2017. Yeah, so it didn't sneak back in. Introduction of Commissioner General's authorized VAT invoice, and it goes on. Administrative measures includes a second phase of VAT and ongoing VAT compliance measures, implementation of the minimum chargeable income. It goes on, and even talks about, and each of them have, a certain percentage of GDP that will be added. Right. So the fund is monitoring all of this. So as part of the VAT measures and the provisions, proper implementation of the VAT, obviously the VAT on electricity and others have become an issue. So if you are going to be removing this just after the board, then they are saying be careful. You have to come to the board again and tell us how you are going to fill, the gap with respect to the amount. This is supposed to increase revenue by 0.9%. That's around just 1%.
Okay.
And remember, the fund had estimated that it will take us about 3 years, to increase the revenue by about 2.5 or 2.3%. So this has to be done over the 3-year period of the program. So if you are taking something out which has a major impact, then you would have to find alternatives, which is not easy, because that means that you have to agree with the fund on the alternatives as part of the second review and convince the board, that you still have the right balance.
Mm. You worked with the IMF at a time when conditionalities became a major criticism that were leveled against the IMF. At the time, there was a suggestion that the IMF was imposing some of these things on the country. So they were telling you which area to tackle, which area not to tackle. Is it the same? Is it that the IMF is telling us that place a tax on gambling, reintroduce the VAT on rentals, or we are the ones who are telling the IMF that this is what we will do to achieve what we promise you we can do?
Yes, I was being accused because it was considered that once you are going to an IMF program, then the normal pressures are being put on you. Yes, it's true that we had to do certain things in the discussions with the IMF. But remember, we also used the homegrown policy. So measures like the sinking fund, and the stabilization fund and the rest. You remember that long before we went to the IMF, we had them in a PRMA, right, which were implemented. We had started a gift means from when I was a deputy, so those things were our own. For example, arrears clearance, which is now a structural benchmark, I'll come to that, were things which were in our homegrown policy, what we call the contract database and all those things, yes. So it's true that we had to comply with the conventional IMF measures, but we also said that for us to be able to stand on our own feet, we must begin to do things on our own and set up things like a sinking fund, review, the expenditure measures and our management of arrears, which leads to budget overruns, and even do some reforms like extending the VAT, to the commercial rentals. Of course, these are businesses most of the time. We are not talking about rental of a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and things like that. Many of those people are family units. They may not even be registered for VAT, and all that. But we're talking about the change in the economy and the real estate sector. And mind you, we were going to do it in a way in which, even though it was supposed to be flat, later integrated so that businesses can get their input tax credit back. So, so we had two elements: the conventional, expenditure management and raising revenue. But remember that even before we went to the fund, we had started the revenue measures, extension of the GRA, measure of IRS and the VAT service, revamping customs. Those were no pressures that were put on us, or the review of the tax laws and the rest. These were things in our own program, which we were putting in place, and therefore just added it and say that these are structural measures that we are doing. Some of these were stopped. So let me go to page 15, right? Public financial management. The authorities have initiated PFM reforms. Well, they say they have initiated it, fair enough. There was the content. But sustained efforts to change practices are needed. This is what the IMF says in the bold heading. And then it says the authorities have prepared and approved by Cabinet 2 important strategy documents in recent months. And these are structural benchmarks. These are benchmarks, which you have to perform. So the IMF put in bracket that these have become structural benchmarks. Structural measures mean that things you are going to do which are deep, some of which you were not doing previously. And the first one is an arrears clearance and prevention strategy. These are contract database, which was stopped. And then a strategy to streamline earmarks, we know the funds and the rest. Okay. Look at the second one, paragraph 31. Strengthening cash management, TSA, which we started, has become increasingly critical in a tight financing environment. And then let me read this again. because of the question you had, the authorities have endeavored to strictly align quarterly alignments with 3-month cash forecasts and to tighten the use of allotments as a control on Ghana's integrated financial management information system, GIFMIS. So that GIFMIS was something which we introduced, which we integrated in our program. So it's not every measure, in our dispensation which was part of it. And then enforcement of sanctions under the PFMA Act. You remember the PFMA? We passed it, and those sanctions were the ones which Mr. Domelevo, who was part of the reforms that we were implementing when he was in controller before he went to Auditor General, was enforcing. It's why it was the PFMA that he was enforcing. It's not the Audit Service Act, right? So I'm reading from the current program to show that some of the things that were suspended, under the Mahama administration, in fact, most Mahama administration are now being required to be reintroduced, which means they shouldn't have been stopped.
Okay, so
let me read another one. The authorities, need to expedite the expansion of GIFMIS coverage across institutions and integration of the system with portals for an effective use. If you were following, this is what we're calling migration, to the GIFMIS system by the departments and agencies. The ministries were covered, so these were steps that we're doing. We had already, and then the integration of GIFMIS and HRMIS together with SWIFT and GIFT. GIFT is something that started, I think, very early in the Kufuor administration, which we took over, took loans and things. But the HRMIS is something which we had installed. That's the Human Resource Management Information System, which is under the Public Services Commission. So again, it has become a structured benchmark for us to do many of these things. So I just want to point out the fact that, in fact, in as much as you also have the IMF telling you things which are very such, the structural deep measures that we are seeing in the program were things that actually came, when in our program, which they took over, the current administration took over, but for the fact that they are being reintroduced, you will see that probably there's some, problem with it.
Of course, and I'm sure now that you're in town, we can have a subsequent discussion on some of these measures and what they were intended to do at that time. But two taxes have been of particular interest to every Ghanaian. First one is a VAT on electricity. First of all, the government says what we are doing is essentially implementing a law that has been there, that has never been implemented. First, do you know that law? And
that is the 2013, VAT, new 2013 VAT Act.
So
it has a provision. But you see, let's take it step by step, right? Because I follow the argument. To say an NDC Act is true, but it's also disingenuous because the current administration passed an amendment, a law, which was basically to do amendments to the exemptions, which is Schedule 1 under Act 1005 in 2019. And they repeated what was in the 2013 agreement. They didn't amend it. So why are they putting the blame? If they really did not want to impose on it, the VAT on electricity, why, did they why did they not include it as an exemption when they passed, that act? You see, the truth is that the 2013, you remember, was the tail end of, and by the way, the provision has been there in various laws. But, we have had a problem with the electricity sector for a very long time. And I think we should put these things in context, right? So, if you remember PSP, Private Sector Participation, ECG, which was to revamp and equip ECG with prepaid meters and others, and which was aborted as part of the energy sector strategies and the rest. So then ECG, part of the problem was ECG was never in a position, to add those taxes accurately when they were having difficulties with billing and everybody was complaining. So why come after 7 years and after stopping the reform that was to improve ECTA, you put the blame on the NDC? And by the way, there was the lifeline. So as I wrote in an article, it wasn't meant to cover everybody. There was to be a level of exemption, just as you have for educational materials, cell materials, and the rest. Above which it's only above that for everybody. That the VAT was to apply.
But is it a good idea from the very beginning to impose VAT on electricity? Already, we're struggling to pay what is currently on the table.
VAT is a tax on consumption. And anything that is an expenditure, will have to attract the VAT. But you see, the point is that the VAT, so on electricity, the measures that are implemented, has added to the imposition of levies that were not part of the VAT regime. So it's going to be extremely difficult to add it. This is the point of the argument. Because you've imposed so many 13 or 14 levies, right? And still you are not able to generate revenue. And so you are now, going back to taxes that are virtually dormant and the rest. So what is required is a thorough review of the VAT. You remember that businesses, in fact, the worst form is that it's the taxes which businesses are going to pay, which they cannot claim credit and refund because the NHIL and the GET fund were removed from the base of the VAT. And this is going to increase prices. So it's not just the one on consumption, on the household. The one on business is even a bigger headache because most households will be exempted under the threshold.
And then there's the emissions levy that's been imposed. What do you think?
I think the government should tell us if what they are doing is a revenue increasing measure and therefore increasing existing tax measures which are environmental in nature and is in our law already. It is not true that we do not have an emissions levy. We have an emissions levy which is part of the excise. So when you import any vehicles, which are the significant pollutants, there are other pollutants. You can talk about the sanitation levy and others which are already in the VAT anyway. But to come to emission, when you import a vehicle, you know that there are two conditions that determine the excise that you pay, in addition to the import duty. And the two conditions are, one, how old is the vehicle? Because the older the vehicle, the likelihood that its engine has become weaker and it will pollute the economy more. So you pay a penalty for that, a higher rate of excise for it. The second condition is what is the capacity of the vehicle? So if you bring in a VH versus somebody who is bringing in, a Kia, small vehicle for their use or whatever, you pay more because you are presumed to be polluted. So it's not a flat rate. That excise is not a flat rate. In fact, it used to be, if you remember, until the current administration came in, that we banned even the importation of 10-year-old vehicles, which was changed to a penalty. So we have this pollution tax already. So if you are in need of money and you want to increase this, don't blame it on the environment. We have an environmental tax already.
So you said they should explain whether this is a revenue generating measure. So we are looking for more money. So
the other levy.
Okay.
For example, like the E-levy, which could conveniently be, that's a we called it when we did the 2013 reforms, non-core financial services. And the target is not the money in your wallet which you are transferring. No. The target is the service fee which the person who is helping you to do the transfer is charging you. That is your consumption of the service. You see, that's the consumption of the service which could have neatly gone into the VAT base. Because every new sector, unless the sector is exempted, would have been in. And that was a reform. But now you come and you change it to a levy. So note that if your bank helps you, or if MTN helps you, and you do a transfer under what we were proposing, the fee, the VAT will be on the fee that you are paying. Just like anybody who goes to an accounting firm and asks, can you help me prepare my return? The fee you pay, is tax. If you go to an architect and you say, I need a drawing, you go to all those things. So there were taxes on those fees. So the fees that are paid in the financial sector, which is an expanding part of the economy, would have been attracted. But the important thing is that businesses like MTN who charge you that amount can offset what they charge you against, their input taxes. You see, and then pay just the difference. But now you are imposing the thing as a levy where all those concessions and things are not part of the system. So it becomes burdensome and punitive. And so it encourages evasion and avoidance, and you don't enrage the expected revenues.
And so, having said that, I'm guessing you are in favor of the call for the emissions tax to go. And what about VAT on electricity? I'm
saying that it is a duplication. I'm saying that, for example, in the case of the e-levy and the rest, these were measures that were to be introduced in a more sanitized manner than they were doing. And with fanfare, were part of the 17 taxes that were supposed to be removed. So why don't you be straightforward and tell Ghanaians that we now agree and implement the original, design, which allows input tax credit and refunds for businesses and therefore minimizes their impact. Why call it a different name? This is what we expect to hear from the Vice President.
What else do you expect to hear from the Vice President? Because the last time you were here, I think one of the things you said was that you expected, or we spoke, you expected him to respond to his own questions, the 170 questions. So are you expecting that today?
We have been told it's going to be given a new direction. One vice president holds another vice president accountable. Becomes just like President Mahama came in. He continued with the Professor Amir's measures. It is my own man. And therefore, I'm going to stop the automation of customs. I'm going to do this and so and all that. And then he was held, and then the lead Pakwesi was held accountable by the current vice president, even for Mahama's policies, because he was the chairman of the economic management team. And now the current chairman of the management team is saying, well, he hasn't said it yet. He said in certain quarter, I'm my own man and the rest. So let's see whether he will repudiate those measures, including the 170 taxes. Then we can do a program on it.
I see.
The 170 questions, and the 17 taxes.
I see. Well, so we'll be looking forward to what he says. And thank you very much for speaking to us.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
That's Honorable Seth Terkper joining us this morning, having a conversation with us. And of course, there's so much to look forward to when it comes to that Valmia thing. But I'll be reading to you the fact that even the Salt FM, they didn't only close them down, they seized their they confiscated their transmitter. So, but have you completed junior high school? Were you not posted to your preferred school? Were you not posted at all? Do you require solid foundation, effective